countries have personalities? Is soft power a psychological construct? In 2015, Colombia's peace talks were collapsing. After more than 50 years of civil war, negotiations between the government and the FARC rebels had broken down.
The Colombian government and the guerrillas of the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, or FARC, did not reach a peace agreement by the scheduled deadline of May 23rd.
Violence had resumed, trust had disappeared. And then, an Indian spiritual leader walks into the room, not as a state negotiator, not as a political envoy, but as somebody who was willing to listen to both sides. To understand this story, we need to ask a very different question. Why Sri Sri Ravi Shankar? But the real question is, why would armed guerrillas, deeply ideological and anti-state and suspicious of religion and spirituality, trust him at all? Because influence is not always institutional. Sometimes it's psychological. Can countries have personalities? Yes. Think about how the world looks at different nations. The United States is seen as power, capitalism, technology and intervention. China as scale, control, strategy, and India as the land of spirituality and non-violence. But these are not just stereotypes. They are psychological frames, and these frames shape how individuals from these countries are perceived globally. Sri Sri Ravi Shankar ji did not walk into Colombia as a person alone. He walked with the larger civilisational equity. India's civilisational image as a land of spirituality and peace opened the doors for what we can call cultural equity in such a situation. A negotiator from Tennessee, USA, for that matter, even though he may be more trained and have better credentials, would have received less moral legitimacy. Sri Sri Ravi Shankar's journey began in India, but it scaled globally. In 1981, he founded the Art of Living, rooted in practices such as the Sudarshana Kriya, designed to stabilize the mind and reduce stress. Over time, this network expanded globally across more than 180 countries, reaching millions in educational activities, prison reform, trauma healing, and conflict resolution. But this was beyond just outreach. It was a reputation that was built across societies. By the time he entered South America, Art of Living had already established a presence across many countries like Colombia, Venezuela, Argentina, and Uruguay. By 2016, around 150,000 people in South America alone had participated in these programs. This meant that he was not perceived first as an outsider. He was already inside the system, inside the psychological frames of people. Colombia's civil war had lasted over 5 decades. More than 22,000 people had been killed, millions displaced, peace talks were fragile. Then a crisis, FARC fighters killed unarmed soldiers, public outrage surged, negotiations had been stalled. The president feared that restarting a war could cost so many more lives. And that's when Sri Sri Ravi Shankar ji stepped in. The interesting thing is that what happened next is not just conventional diplomacy. When he met the FARC leaders in Havana, he did not begin with demands. There was nothing across the table. He began with recognizing their cause. He told them, "You also see yourselves as victims." And this was not an endorsement of sorts. It was not a psychological game. He actually genuinely offered them a space where they could be heard. And for the first time, the rebels said, "Somebody understood our position." This sentence explains everything, because conflict is not just about territory or ideology, it's about identity. And Sri Sri shifted the identity of this conversation effectively. They were listening, they were open to new ideas. And eventually FARC declared a unilateral ceasefire, not because they were defeated or they felt defeated, but because they were perhaps persuaded. And this reopened political negotiations, and in 2016, Colombia signed a peace agreement. And Sri Sri Ravi Shankar was invited to this signing ceremony, seated alongside global leaders, not as a diplomat, but as someone who had helped rebuild trust. This is really a fascinating story because this is not the stereotype of a guru and pravachan. This is not passive spirituality. This is not an individual spirituality either. It's active influence. And Sri Sri was not just teaching scriptures or meditation. He was at the same time entering conflict zones, engaging armed groups, influencing political outcomes, not just for his land, but lands way beyond the Indian territory. And this breaks a common assumption that spirituality is separate from power. In reality, it can be power itself. This, one may say, was not just limited to Colombia. In Venezuela also, during their political crisis, Sri Sri Ravi Shankar engaged directly with President Maduro. Following these efforts, over 100 political prisoners were reportedly released, dialogue channels were reopened. In Uruguay, prison reforms incorporated art of living programs. Across South America, we see a pattern that influence possible without formal authority. To sum it all up, how do we understand this? This is not just soft power in the conventional sense either. This is geopolitical psychology. It works at three levels. At the perceptional level, where India is seen as a civilization of peace and spirituality, of projection, where individuals like Sri Sri embody that perception, and reception, where actors in conflict are more willing to trust and engage. And this creates a very unique advantage, the ability to enter conversations which are otherwise gridlocked. This story seems quite simple, but it is profound. India's influence is not always visible through military alliances, economic leverage, institutional diplomacy, and it sometimes operates through trust, perception, and psychological legitimacy. Soft power is often misunderstood as just cultural expression, but real soft power is the ability to influence outcomes without force, to build trust where power fails, to change how people see themselves and see each other. Sri Sri Ravi Shankar's role in South America is just not an isolated story. It's an example of how something larger, how India's civilization psychology can be at work in global geopolitics.